If COVID had not hit us and we had seen normal growth over the last 2 to 3 years, we actually would have seen more than 45 million commercial flights in the skies globally, right? And carrying more than about 5 billion passengers and 85 million tons of cargo. And that pretty much sums up the significance or the importance of the sector.
Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for industry professionals that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, aerospace and defense, energy, tech, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with the weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for industry professionals, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Vasudevan. He co-leads mobility and transport solutions for infrastructure clients and also leads the aviation business for KPMG in India and is the airport sector lead for KPMG's global network. He has advised several governments, transport authorities, financing institutions, airport owners, operators, and infrastructure sector stakeholders on policy, strategy, finance, operations, procurement, and transactions related solutions. He has worked extensively with aviation and transport sectors, transport sector clients in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Bhutan, Qatar, and Oman on airport development strategies, economic analysis, financial solutions, operational transformation strategies, and many more. He has been actively engaged on various policy and regulatory matters in aviation and privatization of infrastructure in the wider transport sector over the last 22 years globally. And for today's topic, Dr. Vasudevan will be discussing the future of aviation. Now I request Dr. Vasudevan to please begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. Really appreciate that really warm introduction. And welcome to all the members of Blue Circle. This is my first interaction with all of you. And I must thank you for taking time off on a weekend. I know it's always tough to take time off from the limited times that we have with families now, especially after 2 years of COVID, where we did get to spend a lot of time with them. But nevertheless, I think a topic like this, first of all, and I say, I've been very privileged to have a career like that. Listening to Gautam, I was at times wondering whether I've done all of that, but it appears I have over the last 2 decades. And I must, thank the industry and my clients, and of course KPMG, not the least, for having given me this wonderful opportunity to be of service to clients over such a long career. And I hope I'm able to do better than what I did in the future. Again, a topic like this, as all of you would appreciate, does raise a lot of expectations about what we are expected to see or what we want to see in many cases, especially after 2 years of COVID, which completely ravaged the industry, as many of you will know and appreciate. So I think we have limited time, and I'm hoping to cover a lot of interesting perspectives and thoughts around future challenges, opportunities, and maybe areas of business interest for many of you who are probably in some way or the other associated with this sector or its adjacencies and other parts of the transport value chain. So let me begin by stating a very interesting set of facts in one line. If COVID had not hit us and we had seen normal growth over the last 2 to 3 years, we actually would have seen more than 45 million commercial flights in the skies globally, right? And carrying more than about 5 billion passengers and 85 million tons of cargo. And that pretty much sums up the significance or the importance of the sector for many who are uninitiated. And it also tells us what we can expect to see in the future, because as we've seen in the last couple of years, while of course the biggest hit that industry took was on passenger traffic or demand, to put it differently, the cargo movement was not that affected. In fact, that's the only business that probably did very well. And it was important that it did well, because not many people realize this, especially the common folk. But if many of us had actually food on our table or medicines, which we needed access to on an emergency basis, it could have only been possible if the aviation network worked perfectly in those 2 years. And that's exactly what happened. And looking back, I think a lot of credit goes to governments, policymakers, stakeholders, people in the value chain, right across the workers in the cargo business, to the pharmaceutical companies, to the food companies, all of whom I think played a great role in making sure that India was one of probably the few countries, big countries in the world, which possibly had the least relative impact of such a devastating pandemic that we had to see during our times. So that is just to give you a perspective of, what the size of the sector is, what it entails in terms of investments, and what we also can look forward to see in the future. So I just want to quickly cover about the outlook as far as I'm concerned. And this is something that I've tried to put together with a lot of data that's today available in the public domain, including some insights that we have ourselves developed through our work. So essentially, I think we are looking at this to become a $3 to $4 trillion industry, right? And I just mentioned about the passenger and cargo throughput numbers. India, ASPAC, and Africa are supposed to be or expected to be the largest growing markets for the future. Not surprising given the population that these countries collectively have. And also the fact that a lot of new flyers are likely to come from these markets. And that also is good and bad news, because many of these countries already suffer from a lack of infrastructure, not just aviation, but other kinds of transport infrastructure as well. But notwithstanding that, I think this also presents a huge opportunity for businesses, airport operators, commercial businesses, and so on and so forth, including airlines, to cater to these markets in the future. Tourism has come back in a big way. Many of us were suspicious of whether people will travel again, but I think all of us have been pleasantly surprised and good to see that we have now seen a substantial recovery in both domestic and international traffic since it opened up, earlier this year. And to the extent that I'm told, I've not been traveling much of late, but I'm told by my colleagues and friends that it's chaotic in many airports, including Mumbai and Delhi, notwithstanding the fact that they have built or refurbished infrastructure during COVID. And I think a good reflection of the demand and the penchant for travel, which we are seeing again, are these long queues that you see at security. Of course, it's not only a function of passengers going to the terminal. There is, again, if you read between the lines, there are also issues around how we manage our security infrastructure and process here. But it is good enough to suggest that we are looking at a future where we are going to see typically a doubling of traffic in the next 15 to 20 years. And I'll come to some of those stats very soon. And so that's encouraging. And there's also means that there's a lot more investment that needs to come from the private sector. And we've seen big successes on how assets have been built by the private sector and how they've operated them. In fact, India has consistently been ranked in the top 4 or 5 airports, across the world by ACI for a period of about 5 to 6 years. And many of you have experienced these airports. They may not necessarily be the best in class compared to a Changi or maybe a few other European airports. But suffice to say that we've had a huge learning curve. We have some fantastic operators with global experience, including GMR, and I'm sure Adani will go down that route very soon as well. We've seen recently the inauguration of probably the largest single terminal other than Delhi in Bangalore, which went live. I had the privilege of being there for the inaugural, and it's a fantastic terminal. Many of you will get to use it by the end of this month. And of course, the fact that there are many more airports being planned just to cater to this demand. The other big business, which is a huge adjacency to the core airport business itself, is the commercial and real estate business. As you have seen in many countries across the world, including the big hubs in India, this is now generating a lot of what we call the non-aero revenue, which is also important as we look at improving profitability and shareholder value for investors in the future. Interestingly, more than 50% of the demand and infra investments are likely to come in Asia Pacific, which we are part of. And that's where a lot of action is expected to be in terms of growth and also business opportunity. So I'll skip some of the other parts, which I will cover. I think it is also important to tell you that drones are completely transforming aviation. It's an aviation subject. While today we are talking about it only in the context of last mile logistics, all of you would know that it is something that could completely transform even regional commutes in the future. And of course, with a lot of work being done on the technology side, while a hydrogen-powered plane seems to be far into the distant future, I can tell you with some certainty that there's a lot of work going on in Europe and US. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have an Airbus or a Boeing product in the next 4 or 5 years, at least for a short-haul flight. So please expect that to come in our lifetimes as well, sooner than later. Now, here is a quick summary. I mean, I don't want to waste too much time here. I mean, I just wanted to give you a sense of what COVID actually did before moving on to what the future holds for us. I mean, across the board, you could see that companies in the value chain or businesses in the value chain got significantly impacted. I was personally a victim because we hardly had anything to do for a couple of years as consultants. Simply because there were no flights in the skies and there was no business on the ground. Everybody had cash flow issues, and the first victims were obviously consultants like us. But we've come back very strongly since then, especially in the last 12 months. So on 4 key elements, I think COVID took a real toll on asset utilization, on demand, on working capital, from which I think many companies are still recovering, and it's not been an easy journey from there. It also prompted a lot of structural changes, purely from a policy and a regulatory side. We've not seen the end of all of that. In fact, it's not triggering a new debate in terms of the philosophy of regulation itself in India. That's a separate subject in itself, which I'm happy to talk about at a later date. A lot of interesting things in the pipeline in terms of how regulation would change in order to facilitate growth in the sector. I'll skip this. This is again to give you a sense of, as I mentioned, the big markets of the future. I did not mention the Middle East. It's again an interesting cauldron of possibilities. I personally had the opportunity of working for many projects there, but I think COVID has completely changed the concept of hubbing and long-haul travel. India had missed that opportunity many, many years back because it simply didn't have a national carrier of repute or capacity to fulfill that aspiration. We also were very liberal with our bilateral rights, which essentially meant that carriers like Emirates or Lufthansa or even Singapore, to some extent, for eastbound travel, managed to take that to their advantage and make sure that they fed their own hubs in their own countries. But now a lot is changing. If many of you are observing some of the statements of the ministry and the government of India, there's now a clear policy focus on making India the hub. India has some strategic advantages in terms of locations. And also from a hubbing standpoint, east and west travel can be quite easy if we are able to provide the infrastructure, which is the key, which is already there in some form in Delhi, Bombay, and some of the other bigger locations. But more importantly, to find that big anchor carrier, which many people now believe is possible with the consolidation of 4 carriers under the Tata label. So we'll have to wait and see, but it's certainly exciting times for us to look forward to, hoping to fly either east or west without having to go through Dubai or Singapore, because in the next 4 or 5 years, we expect substantial air fleet or airline capacity also to come to our major hubs to feed that traffic. And mind you, many of one of the reasons with why Emirates actually was so successful is about 45% of outbound traffic to the West from India and South Asia, which includes Bangladesh and Pakistan, actually used to go through Dubai or Doha. And that's one of the reasons why they wrote such a successful story on the hubbing, uh, you know, uh, strategy. Well, I think I mentioned about drones. I also want to draw your attention to the investments that are already happening. There are more than 225 planned projects, underway across Asia Pacific alone, with an estimated investment of about $220 billion. So you can imagine the scale of investments as well as the ambition for the future across governments in the region, because everybody believes that ASPAC is the future. Right. And we all know other reasons why we need to focus on these markets, whether it's the demographics, whether it's the movement of supply chains, primarily from China today, because of all that's happening in that part of the world. We still don't know the net result of the war in Ukraine. But a lot of things are already changing. And the big two OEMs, Boeing and Airbus, are betting big on these markets. And I can tell you that from many conversations that I've had in the recent past. And many of them are also trying to move their MRO and ancillary infrastructure to India and South Asia to cater to that demand. So again, exciting times to look forward to. Now, if I were to summarize what actually will transform this sector in the next 5 to 7 years, I picked on 5 elements which I think are the core. But again, there will be other parts of the business which will become important as well. For me, it's passenger safety, number one, because a lot has been learned during COVID as well in terms of what we can and we should do as aviation service providers. Cost optimization of management is going to be one other critical area, because most people have realized that this probably may not be the only crisis that the sector will face in the future, and there could be many more, including future pandemics, and they always have to be ready for that. Asset optimization, many of us understood what this meant in the context of COVID again. You had large assets. If they remain unutilized, it's obviously going to create several challenges, right from servicing your debt to making sure that you're able to realize the right returns for investors. I think many of these new builds, if I can call them that, are actually optimized for modular growth or modular expansion, and also repurposing of use. And we will see that happen as we see newer terminals and newer infrastructure built. And that's an exciting area to look out to or look forward to. Technology, I think it's part of our lives today. We can't run away from it. It's also going to be a big lever for transformation for the aviation business. We already saw a lot which happened during COVID in terms of how technology was enabled. Many of you may now be familiar with DigiYatra. It's not had a great start, but it's certainly likely to transform the customer experience from a journey standpoint. And I have personally used it a couple of times, and I think it's a big change for sure. While there are a lot of pinpricks there, which I think the government and the operators need to address. But I'm sure in the next 6 to 8 months, you'll see a very seamless experience on how technology will, make your journey a lot more interesting, lot less stressful, and also give you a lot of excitement about what you can do in the airport while you're waiting to board the flight. And then, of course, the last part is sustainability. I don't have to emphasize any more on this except to mention the term. Literally everything we talk about today has a green quotient. And by that, I mean, you can't plan infrastructure or run operations today without the core of sustainability built into it, whether it is in compliance, whether it is in your ability to raise better finance, whether it is in your ability to behave like a more responsible citizen, and so on and so forth. And this is catching on big time. A lot of initiatives till date have been voluntary, as you know. Many airports have done their bit on bringing solar power in a big way, as you said, as you know. But that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot more that's happening in the sustainability space in terms of new technology, on recycling, on water management. For example, I just got to know that T2 in Bangalore has consciously used hundreds of different species of endangered plants. Many people only talk about endangered species as fauna, But the flora is what Bangalore Airport is focused on, which is great as an aspiration, because it also takes a lot for them to keep ensuring that these plants are able to get regrown and replanted wherever they've used them in the terminal today. And it's one of the greenest terminals that I've seen in a long time. I'll skip this. This is only to give, maybe I'll just spend a couple of minutes and then move on to the other slides. A lot of airport operators actually revamped their approach even during COVID, particularly from a manpower optimization standpoint, because this is a big challenge. Terminal operations, and this is the point I was, talking about, with respect to asset optimization or utilization. Many of these terminals were shut down, as you know, just to ensure that they were more productive in terms of asset use or energy use or cost. And I think that's something that you would see in the future, notwithstanding any other triggers for running the business. It is just, I think, a smart way of ensuring that you manage the demand flexibly. And you will see that in designs, you will see that in construction quality, you will see that in terms of additional services that you may get, on the go. Retail space is again one big area that airport operators have thought a lot about. It's never easy to sustain businesses in a captive environment. While we all think that airports are captive customers, not all customers spend. Please understand that, and I'm sure you yourself shirk from spending all the time if you're a frequent traveler. But that's an area which is seeing some interesting new changes with technology coming in and influencing consumer behavior in a big way. And that customer today is no longer just the person of the airport. Even if he's beyond the airport, he continues to become a target customer for both the airport and the retail concessionaires. Again, it's a subject of its own. There's a lot that we can speak about. I'll reserve that for a later date if we have the opportunity. But this is an area which is going to get really exciting in terms of what it means, both in terms of value for the business as an airport or an airline, and value for the commercial industry itself or the real estate business itself. Concessions, of course, they were largely hit. I'm essentially talking about your food and beverages, duty-free and retail operations in airports. And they're all coming back, but under very different structures with a better risk-reward, contract to boot. And again, I think there's been a lot of innovation in terms of how these commercial contracts have been structured post-COVID. And we're going to see a lot more innovation in these contracts, including digital management of these contracts, which is, again, one exciting space to look forward to, especially with blockchain coming in a big way. And let's now jump quickly into what this all means for India. I tried to paint a picture of what the global scenario was pre-COVID, during COVID, and what we can look forward to. But I think the India story itself is pretty exciting. And many of you have been reading a lot of stuff of late, I'm sure, from the new minister. There's a lot that's happening on the policy side. But I think, to me, the biggest challenge is the financing challenge. While it's an opportunity as well, I do think because much of the market of the future is going to be here and in wider Asia Pacific, and therefore should we get the investments automatically, I also think we need to do this wisely, because India is a price-sensitive market. So you can't create a Changi or a Heathrow or a Dubai just because you believe you have the money. Ultimately, it has to be paid for, and therefore we do need a different model. In the past, we've always compared Cochin with other airports for being a functionally efficient airport, and it is a fantastic airport, no doubt. But again, there are 2 or 3 schools of thought there. It's an interesting space that will evolve in terms of the thinking and also the solutions. But I think the crux of the matter is that the estimate at the least suggests that we need about $40 billion over the next 20. I would think in less time than 20 years, given the demand and the aspiration that we have. And this is essentially to fund about 200 plus airports, which is a near doubling of what we already have as operational airports. Plus, of course, catering to about 1.1 billion trips. That's, even notwithstanding the recovery, about 5x what we are doing today, or a little more than 5x than what we're doing today. So what does that mean? For me, it means investments across 4 key elements of the value chain, which is airlines, the MRO business, which is closely attached to how airlines run their business, aircraft acquisition, which is a big cost, and airports in itself, because I think without more airports and better connectivity, realizing that ambition of catering to about 1.1 billion trips is going to be a pipe dream. And there is again this, growing concern over recession now across the world. India seems to be fairly insulated on many fronts. We're also already seeing the minor impacts of what's happening in the rest of the world, and it is going to push up the cost of financing. And this is where I think elements of sustainability of green financing also come in, because there are many institutions across the world, including sovereign assets and other financing institutions, which are now creating exclusive corpuses to finance green infrastructure at much lower rates and much longer tenures than what you would find under conventional financing. And I think that's a great opportunity for India, given the scale of our ambition, given the impact that it would have on the environment, and therefore our ability to also redress, that challenge, by designing infrastructure and planning infrastructure or implementing solutions in a way that can allow us easier and faster access to green financing. This is an interesting fact. I don't know how many of you are aware that we are already the third largest domestic market in the world, just behind China and the US. China is by far the largest market post-COVID as well. They seem to have done well, notwithstanding the crisis they seem to continue to have with COVID relapses. But I think for us, the aspiration is to become the second largest aviation market in the next 20 years, which is eminently possible for all the reasons I've mentioned. We're already seeing, I think, more than green shoots of recovery. We will probably hit pre-COVID numbers by middle of next year is what we expect. And there's every chance, if we do our stuff well, to become the second largest aviation market in the world behind China. And I spoke about this in terms of number of airports. I just want to cover a couple of more points which are important from a planning standpoint. I did mention about quadrupling of the fleet to cater to this demand, and this is across aircraft types, narrow bodies, wide bodies, regional jets. Business and general aviation is one other big segment which is likely to grow. We are already seeing a lot of investments in that segment with new players coming in. You could also see a Uberized kind of model in the next 2 or 3 years. There are some companies which have already been set up to come in as aggregators to provide you services on demand. For example, if you want to plan your holidays to London and let's say to Maldives and any other part of the world, you could just subscribe to a package which allows you access to a business jet or any other preferred jet based on the size of your family or the team that is flying, and have these calendarized every year for the next 3 years for a fraction of the payment that you would normally pay for business class. And as you have more subscribers to this model, it only gets better and better. So that's an exciting future to look forward to as far as business and general aviation is concerned as well. Last but not the least, and this is important because we only keep focusing on the good parts of the growth element. So while we know that there's going to be a lot of demand, while we know that passengers are going to come in, there is also going to be a huge demand for training and scaling of pilots. One, because I think the newer aircraft will entail more training, and secondly, because you're going to see probably more variety in the types of aircraft that will fly in future, including some retrofitted cargo planes and stuff, new engineering and technology that's coming into aircrafts. I think this is one big issue which has not been discussed enough, but it is certainly something that is going to affect us in many of the markets in the aspect. And these are just rough indicators of what the opportunity is. But I think roughly, the shortfall in terms of number of pilots today, as on date, based on the forecasted growth in fleet, is estimated as anywhere between 9,000 and 10,000 pilots. And a lot of this demand in the past was met through expats who obviously used to double up to fly certain routes in India, especially from the hubs. But that's not going to happen forever. In fact, even during COVID, I think they had to relax a policy where the government was very clear that they will stop the policy on allowing airlines to fly more expats as pilots. But besides the cabin and cockpit crew, which is the core demand that will come because of this increase in fleet, the quadrupling of the fleet, there's also going to be a huge demand for AMEs and engineers and service providers on the ground below wing. And that's the other big challenge that we will have. And certainly, I think there are many companies already investing in this, including global ones. It is a challenge, but I think the government is already doing its bit in terms of privatizing some of these businesses, bringing in more simulator companies, encouraging joint ventures. And that's one other space where, as businesses, if some of you are keen, you need to look at this closely with a bigger lens, because there is a huge demand. There is money to be made here. A lot of the students today who fly abroad for their training actually pay twice as much as what they could get in India. And there again is a price arbitrage opportunity, and get more people to get trained here, including people who will fly overseas in the future. So I think that's a great opportunity for us to look forward to. I'm not going to cover any of the other slides except this one. I did, of course, have one to show you that the winds of change are here. We're seeing more new carriers. It's never going to be easy for a new carrier to do well, especially in this turbulent market. But we are going to see some fundamental changes in terms of aircraft or airline ops. The opportunity is there. The innovation platforms are available. Technology is going to be a great enabler. So I think we can look forward to a very different industry in the next 5 to 10 years than what we've seen in the last 10. And just to demonstrate or re-emphasize that point, I have this closing slide, which I call as the connected airport of the future. Essentially, I think this is built on a cloud. And I can't summarize it in any other manner. So all the technologies that we are talking about today at the drop of a hat, whether it's AI, ML, or blockchain, or including some of these ops tech platforms that many of these airports today use, whether it's from Honeywell or Thales or others who are in this business, the power of staying connected with an iPhone or an iPad or a monitor as a single source of truth is going to completely change, one, efficiency, two, the cost of operations, three, customer experience. And you will see this happen more and more. It may not be visible to the naked eye, but when you walk into any airport today, especially the big hubs, trust me, there's a lot on technology that's working on the back end, including data analytics. And we still haven't seen how powerful this is yet. But just to give you an example, tomorrow you may be able to travel from here to London, wherever you are, if you are probably just using one app on your phone. Today, we know that's not real. But trust me, in 2 years' time, you may just need one app to ensure that your entire itinerary, including pickup of your bags if you need the service from your doorstep to the aircraft belly and collecting it at your hotel directly without even having to lug it, is possible because of connected airports. And there's a lot of work happening across airports in the world to make sure this is possible seamlessly. One of the other big areas where you're going to see a big transformation is in your digital passports. I know that India is not yet a signatory, while ICAO has already put out the guidelines for how this should be done. But some countries have already subscribed to it and are using it in Europe, and maybe not in the US as much as in Europe. But again, it's not too far out in the distant future. You will not need to carry, hopefully, your physical documents once you have these digital passports and ID cards. And DigiYatra is just, I think, a basic reflection of what technology can do to make sure that your international and domestic journeys are enjoyable and seamless. Again, thank you to all of you. I know that many of you probably had other things to do today. Thanks to Srishti and Gautam and Blue Circle for having given me this opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. And Gautam, over to you.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Vasudevan. It was a pleasure listening to you. Such an extensive and detailed presentation directed. I couldn't have thought of a better person to take us through this.
Thank you.
I'll quickly jump onto the questions. It's a mixed bag of operational plus technical plus just a business overview. So I'll move on to them, starting from Rohan Singh. The first question is, how effective is wet leasing? Does it erode market share?
Rohan, can you explain the context if you can come on, because that's a very generic question to ask.
Sure. So then while he gives us his views, and we can just move on to
the next. I'm happy to get a clarification from him. Yeah.
Sure. Do you think biometric technologies such as facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, etc., will become the default way of verification and help the entire verification process become paperless?
Yes, and that's essentially what is being attempted through this Digiyatra platform. I think the challenge today is that we have multiple layers from a governance standpoint, which is where I think things have not been exactly cozy, to say, you know, to use a slightly different term. Uh, for example, BCAS has its own set of rules to ensure that security and risk of any safety or security threats is minimized, right? So they follow some guidelines which they believe is necessary, let's say, in the Indian context. And this is where perception makes a lot of difference. The technology is available. It is consistently being used across the world. I don't see any challenge as long as we are able to create a database on a cloud, ensure real-time verification, and cleanup of the data. The cleanup part is equally important because of data privacy issues, and many people have had concerns over it in other parts of the world, not so much in India. But eventually, you'll realize that because third parties have access to your travel data, and it doesn't mean just a ticket with boarding information, it means a lot of other things, right? There is always a risk of compromising what is regarded as personal data. But I think even in that space, a lot has been done to ensure that data is cleaned up every 24 hours. And the current system works on that principle, that every time you board a flight or complete the journey, your data is erased within 24 hours, right? So it is the future. It is something that will happen more and more. And I think there are many companies which are now lining up to provide these as third-party services, and airports themselves will have the license and the regulation to support it.
Thank you.
And airlines, of course.
Yeah. I'll move on to the next question by Priyanka. She says, during COVID, the aviation industry hit rock bottom. What does the future look like for the industry in the upcoming years? I think you already took us through it, but
I did. But let me tell you, Priyanka, that I did mention about the big changes that you could see on the travel experience part, right? And that's the key, because ultimately, and the one other thing that I think is going to change dramatically is regulation. So I think the future looks good. All of us were worried, to be honest, on whether people will start flying again because of the fear of contracting something else, or the fact that you can't ensure safety all the time, and so on and so forth. But I must say one thing: all of us are, to use that famous English word, peripatetic, right? We love being on the move, whether around our houses or traveling places or whatever. The point is that travel and mobility is inherent to our nature, and that's something we cannot stop, right? And the fact that we are all globally mobile today because of the opportunities, the fact that we are culturally more integrated with the rest of the world, the fact that we are now part of global supply chains as businesses and as employers and employees, essentially means that you can't avoid travel, right? And even if it means you're avoiding travel for business, it means you're going to substitute that with travel for personal pleasure or leisure, right? And that's precisely what's happening today. And therefore, the demand will continue to be there. The question really is that at what cost can we sustain this demand? Because there is this new animal called sustainability and impact on environment, and aviation has never been, the beauty boy of green aviation, right? It's a very tough, sector to operate in, to comply with as far as green KPIs are concerned. But having said that, Priyanka, it is an exciting future. Travel will be a lot more easier. You will have probably a lot less uh, waiting time at many of these choke points that you see today. And people will treat you like any other retail customer walking into your favorite store on a weekend in a mall. I think that's what you should expect.
thank you. I'll quickly move on to the next question by Aarti. She's asking, how are airlines moving towards clean energy?
Good question, Aarti. This is one bone of contention or pain point that doesn't have an easy answer. I did mention briefly about technologies that aircraft companies or OEMs are experimenting with. It's a genuine effort to move to a cleaner fuel, and I think a lot of what's happening today, is around the fuel area, right? While aircrafts are being built lighter because of composites, new materials, engines are being made more efficient for sure and quieter. That is something which you're already seeing in some of the newer line of fleets. But I think the core is really around what we are calling now sustainable aviation fuel. So India has taken some baby steps there and is probably likely to, make some big gains there, because IOCL, one of the big, public sector oil companies, has actually now put in place a huge plant to start blending fuel. for aviation, right? And they will start with 1% or 2% planes, I'm told, but move on to 10 or 15% planes. So I think the next 3-4 years clearly is going to be around moving from conventional ATF, which is basically kerosene, to blended fuel, which essentially will make a big difference in terms of what aircrafts burn. But that's not going to move the needle, and that's why I think as an ecosystem, if you take aviation as a whole, it'll have to be a party or a tango that's being done between the airport, the airlines, and the service providers together. I mean, when I say that, I mean things like electric buses to take you to the aircraft, things like your vehicles entirely being run on battery infrastructure or electric infrastructure, things like battery charging or charging stations at airports. These are elements which will substantially improve the green quotient from a scope 2, scope 3 emission standpoint, including procurement of energy from outside. So just to cut the long story short, airlines is probably the biggest culprit in this, because they burn fuel which contributes the most to GHGs, but they have very little in their hands. They have to depend on the aircraft manufacturers and engine manufacturers while something is being done on fuel. But as an ecosystem, on other elements being brought under this umbrella, we can make a much bigger difference in terms of the impact on the environment.
So I just have a follow-up question to this, Dr. Vasudevan.
Yes,
you
Gautam.
spoke of batteries, etc. Now, even when we talk about passenger vehicles, I'm talking about cars, there's a big range anxiety, right? Now, how do you see batteries being incorporated for planes or large vehicles like a passenger plane or a cargo plane? Want to see much of a range anxiety there, because they fly over 5,000 kilometers? So how do you see batteries
It's
sustaining?
a great point. It's a great question, which is why I think the realists are essentially saying the future of electric flying is not going to be beyond short haul, which is 1 hour flights, right? From a flight mechanics perspective, from an engineering standpoint, from a safety standpoint, and from a range anxiety standpoint, anything within an hour or about an hour is what I think this technology can cater to. And those are the realists. While, of course, the lot of people were saying, no, we can still bend the boundaries and go beyond, right? I mean, God help them if they can, because if Elon Musk can take us to space for a holiday, maybe it's still possible to do a 6-hour flight on an electrically fueled plane, right? But I think to be realistic about this, it's the short haul market, which is again big, especially in India, and Udan has been a great success, as you know. And there are other regional routes which can fit into that so-called magic car and provide the market for this space. But it's a great question, Gautam. I mean, the future will tell us on whether it's possible. But to my mind, I think at this point, it's safe to say that these will essentially be commute flights, essentially in the city context, and which is, I think, another big transformation likely to happen on air taxis, as we call them, right? And of course, on short-haul commercial flights, which will take you, let's say, from Chennai to Coimbatore or Chennai to Bangalore.
True. I agree with that. And I think to take this step also, France is looking to ban its commercial flights, which are carbon emissions, just the 1 hour, 2 hour distance ones.
That's
so, yeah. Great. Thank you. So I'll just move on to the next question. Seeing the rush at airports, is it time for them to get X-ray machines for full body screening so that security clearance can be expedited? I think they're all talking about the Delhi mayhem which is happening. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'd like to know your name, because I'm with you on this, right? So, yeah. So I think it's a great point. These are things that will have to change. I don't know if some of you are familiar with this technology called computer managed tomography, right? Basically, these are machines which can scan your bags in 3D, right? And, believe it or not, Bangalore had experimented with it, Hyderabad had experimented with it. But again, they didn't get the clearance from BCAS. For whatever reason, again, our regulators are tighter in terms of their expectations. But, it's always a fear of that next big incident, right? I mean, we'd all love to just dump our bags on that tray. Already we have ATRS, which is that automatic tray retrieval system, which works very well in most airports. It's, of course, not very well managed in terms of queuing and all that, which we still have problems on. But that's more a human created issue. But the technology is there. And many airports, I think even in the US, TSA has cleared it. So essentially, you can dump your laptop bag without removing anything from it. I know it's a pain. I'm also not a big fan of being patted down when you have these full body scanners now, which are being installed. But I think you'll need to be a little patient. It'll all go. But I think it's just in the testing phase now. You will have a more comfortable journey in the future. I have no doubts about it. There's a lot of pressure that's on these regulating agencies to relax these rules in India, especially because of our aspiration to make this a hub. And you can't do this for an international passenger who wants to hub through India when he's now going through a Dubai or a London, where he doesn't have to go through this experience. But suddenly he finds he needs to take a connecting flight from India because he has choice, but has to, endure this pain of, being patted down or taking his stuff out. So eventually we'll have to fall in line. The question is when, not if.
Done. Thank you. So the next question is, how are policies and regulations supporting drones adoption? I believe you touched upon it, but they would love to know a little more that what.
Lovely. No, I think these are all great questions, Gautam. I'm happy I'm part of this. So I don't know, Madhav, sorry, this was from Rohan again. No, which question was this? Sorry, I missed that.
This is again by an anonymous attendee.
Okay. No, so I think you may do well to go through this new drone rules that were issued in I think August 21, right? And I think we probably have one of the most liberalized drone rules in the world, and a lot of it is modeled on what the UK and the US have done earlier. And I think it opens up the spectrum of possibilities for any kind of unmanned or manned drone service in India. So there's a lot that you can read there. Plus, I think the government also has come out with a performance-linked incentive scheme, which is again working very well to encourage Indian entrepreneurs to invest in this space. Lots of companies have come forward to take advantage of this PLI. It is basically capital subsidy given to many of these drone manufacturers and software manufacturers for drones. To support growth of the business for the next 3 or 4 years, subject to achieving a certain turnover. So you may just want to read it. A lot of it is very well written. In fact, my ex-boss and colleague was the Joint Secretary Amber Dubey, who went from KPMG for that 3-year role, was instrumental in architecting it with the ministry. And I think a lot of good things have been said in that. If you have any doubts, I'm happy to answer them separately. But it'll be worthwhile going through the drone rules just to give you a sense of what that market is likely to look like.
Surely. No.
Also visit the Digital Sky platform, Gautam. You can put it up in your WhatsApp group. You can see the number of companies who have come forward post the drone rules and who are now licensed to operate services, whether it's for health, agri, for disaster management. There are lots of companies coming with multiple services today, right, as third-party service providers. And that site will tell you which are those companies which are doing well, which are the companies which have come on board. And if there are any common business interests, people on this group can easily connect with them because they have details of these companies and their promoters as well.
Surely, sir. Just to add to this, because we run a platform with over 15,000 people, we've had a few like requests from African countries to import drones for their services, be it healthcare, be it logistics. So we do see India being a very, very big hub for developing economies and even already developed economies, because as a cheaper resource for the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, interesting. I'd like to be part of those discussions if possible.
Surely, surely. We'd be happy to see you. I'll quickly move on to the next one from Madhav Arora. He's saying, with increased passenger traffic, how is the air fleet being taken care of?
Good question again. I think you guys are all reading a lot, so we cease to be experts anymore because you know as much as we do. There is a big challenge in terms of production lines, especially because we only have 2 OEMs who cater to much of the world's market, right? Boeing and Airbus. Now, India is primarily an Airbus market today. Boeing lost a lot of its market share because of the known MAX incident, right? But they're coming back strongly with the newer version of the Max, and many of these new carriers are also ordering planes. But COVID has again hit their supply chains very hard. And while there is demand, for example, India itself, as I showed you, requires another 600 odd planes just in the next 12 months. And I don't think the pipeline is, I mean, the assembly line is good enough to cater to in that demand in any case. So there is a challenge. One of the long-term aspirations of India has always been to become a manufacturer of planes. By that, I mean not basically having a homegrown company, which is eminently possible. You could have somebody like the Tatas or Adanis or somebody come with the right technology and investment to set up shop. But it's never easy to take on the biggies like Boeing and Airbus. But it could be the Airbus, Boeing, or an Embraer setting up a huge facility in India. It's not easy, but now that we have several economic alliances, it is certainly something that we could look forward to in the future. India becoming a production hub for the rest of Asia Pacific, right? Because we have the talent, we have the land, we have the infrastructure, we have the policy, we have the regulation to take care of all the concerns. So I think that's the long-term solution. We need at least one more player in this space. If you look at the demand that we have, of course, many people say this is only a short-run problem and things should sort itself out for the next couple of years. But no, the funny thing in this industry, like many others, is especially in this industry, is if you fall back 2 years, then the catch-up becomes a lot more difficult, right? And nobody wants to miss the opportunity. So I'm sure Airbus and Boeing are doing enough to also ensure that they turn out more planes than what they did in the past. But today, there's certainly a constraint to get the planes that you want at the time that you want them.
Thank you. The next question is by Saurabh. I know you had a slide on this, but maybe from a MSME or a startup perspective, the question could be, what are the opportunities for investments in the aviation sector?
Yeah, I did mention about skilling. It's certainly one area that many of us could look at, even if we were just entrepreneurs, because there's a lot that you can gain by putting money in that sector. It doesn't cost much to set up infrastructure. The biggest cost is a simulator, not the classroom infrastructure. And land is not very much. You can even build something in 3 to 4 acres of land, right? But we need many of them. So I think the government is keen that we have more of these facilities. So skilling and training is certainly one, and aviation academy as a generic opportunity is certainly one. If you look at technology per se, I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of building that connected airport. Today, there are some 4 or 5 big companies which cater to that requirement. But there are a lot of boutiques who are doing a lot of business in the aviation ecosystem today, including with operators, airlines, and stuff. So if somebody is looking for an opportunity to invest and grow big, software, data analytics, and technology solutions per se itself is a huge opportunity. The other big area, if you ask me, again, because I'm biased towards this whole green agenda thing, like many of us are, because it is affecting our lives on a daily basis, is to see what you could do to bring in, let's say, more BIM, building infrastructure management tools, your digital twin tools, creating those simulated environments to see, what kind of optimization can you do before you even construct something. What is it that you can do on the compliance side, which is automated, which is based on a tool that can virtually capture data real time and then report facts. For example, if we are sitting here and talking, suppose you would ask me a question, how many tons of CO2 did you generate from all the buildings in your airport at Bangalore over the last 20 days? If I can hit a button and if I can get a fair sense of what that number is, it also gives me the opportunity to manage it well. Those tools are still raw in some forms. So maybe as an opportunity, they are businesses worth investing. That's insofar as business opportunities are concerned. But I guess your question is also about core investments in building infrastructure. Airports clearly is the biggest space in which you can invest and make money in, because it's regulated and the regulator gives you a fixed return. So you will expect a lot of foreign operators now to invest in airport infrastructure in India, because of the fact that demand is here. Airline, I mean, I don't have to belabor that point. All these aircraft, especially the new gen aircraft, cost a lot of money, right? But again, that's in an oligopoly today. I don't think there's any room for a third player, but I would like to see a third player there. Certainly, there's a market opportunity for a third player to come in there from a manufacturing standpoint. So that's a big investment which governments and airlines will have to make. You're already seeing that happen. And I think that's a big cost on the balance sheet of any airline. The airline, and I think Rohan earlier also asked about wet lease and dry lease. Wet lease is very limited in today's context. It was only used as a solution for COVID when they had issues on leasing staff or getting staff along with the aircraft. But I think today that question, if I can answer Rohan's question differently, in this context, today the big challenge that big carriers, especially dominant carriers like Indigo, have is to find that right balance between leasing aircraft and owning aircraft, right? And there are multiple elements of how the economics have worked out. So maybe we can save that for a separate discussion. But that's the future conundrum. Because we have so much demand, are we in better control of the market if we buy or lease aircraft not only from a financing and an operating cost perspective, but also in terms of having flexibility in deploying aircraft or even subleasing aircraft in the future for those who are in need of these planes, especially when they are about 6 to 7 years old, when the economics completely changes, just like a car. I hope I've answered the other question on investments.
Yes.
Again, as I said, there's a broad spread of what you can do in the aviation sector. I would also add, I think, Gautam, you mentioned about this, we discussed it briefly. There's a huge scope for investing in, your battery charging infrastructure across airports, right? Because most people today come to the airport for either flying or doing their business. And because it's a captive environment, it's much easier to build something and get paid for than putting something up in a petrol bunk today, right? So I think that's another opportunity for many of these stakeholders to, be part of. Put in money, create that infrastructure, have a platform where they can use just like your, what's that thing called, where you rent your cycle with the app? You have these tilt bikes and all that, right?
Correct, yes.
Ride apps, the ride apps as they call them. You can have charging apps where you just go plug in, charge, pay online, be done with a fast charge in 20 minutes and keep going, just when you're crossing the airport. So it's a great business opportunity for those who are interested to tap that.
Interesting outlook. Would love to see how more businesses, more startups can come from airports.
Exactly. And this is a great environment for the startups to flourish.
True. Being a captive audience, as you said, is actually a good point.
Yep.
So, I mean, that covers also not just, covers not only just Rohan's question, also covers Saurav's question. So thank you so much.
Yeah. I like this one. Can pilotless planes be a reality in the future? It is already a reality, except that it is in the testing phase. Balaji?
Yeah.
So it can be, in fact, I mean, it's interesting, I mentioned about the skilling challenge, right? Many people believe we can never meet this demand for so many pilots and cabin crew. So they are now saying it's easier for us to get a plane to fly without a pilot than find a guy, train him, retrain him, pay him, all of that, right? So the funny thing actually, Gautam, and I know you're laughing, I don't know about Balaji, the concern is not whether is the airline. The concern is the guy sitting in the plane. Imagine if you were in the car, backseat of a car, and you didn't have a driver. How safe would you feel, even with your seatbelts on? So it's actually a behavioral issue or a psychology issue. Will we ever be ready to fly a plane without a pilot? That's the question, Balaji, you should answer. If your answer is yes, the market will cater to that demand.
I guess it's just such an unreal thing for Indians to experience, because if you were talk about road and autonomy, I mean, we could always hit a cow or any other street animal because it's in abundance. But maybe in countries with like Norwegian countries, which have hardly any population, could be a more possible outlook. But I would love to see autonomy in the air.
That's true. But, the other important question to answer is, what's the risk-reward equation, right? If you're in a plane and something goes wrong, there's a 99.9% chance you won't survive. But that's very different in a car. So the perception of safety, the way the insurance companies see it, all of it matters. So it's not just the airline and the passenger.
True, very true. Thank you. So I'll just ask the last question then from Manish
So,
Khare. He's saying, what future technologies would influence aviation sector the most in the fundamental ways of how we see it currently?
what future technologies would influence aviation sector the most in fundamental ways of how we see it currently? You know, a lot of what's happening, Rohan, is I don't know who that question was.
Manish Khare.
Manish, right? A lot of what is happening, Manish, today on the technology standpoint is all focused towards improving the passenger experience or the customer experience. So we are always biased towards the passenger, but you know, even the cargo business, which is equally important, or the fuel farm business, while we don't see it every day, is equally important, right? So anything that, let's say, can reduce your stress in terms of the entire journey, right from booking a ticket to alighting at the next stop. At every key point in that journey, which we call moments of truth, there are technologies being deployed today to make sure that you're completely stress-free. I'll give you a quick example of what you can expect. Today, I don't know how many of you walking into an airport terminal actually looks for information on flight gates and departure times. There is this tendency, what we call as FIDS, right? Flight Information Display Systems. They're all over the place. But I can tell you for sure that when you're standing in that queue trying to go through security, there are multiple screens on top, which are all FIDS. I don't think you ever look at it. The alternative to that is the device you hold in your hand, because you're always looking at it, right? Now, you don't need FIDS, frankly, if that information can be beamed on your screen every 10 seconds or every minute. And this is something you could expect to see in the future. If airports are smart, they will avoid wasteful, while it may be a regulatory requirement, they can minimize the number of such screens for sure, and make sure that you have live data while you're standing in the security queue, while you're shopping for something, waiting for your boarding announcement, while you're having your coffee, to the extent that if you're sitting at a Starbucks and your gate is set 10 minutes away, you should have a prompt on your screen when you're sipping your coffee to say, your flight boarding has been announced. Boarding will start in 3 minutes. Your walk time to the boarding gate is 7 minutes, and therefore you need to leave in 3 minutes. This message on your phone, imagine how simple it makes your life, rather than constantly sipping your coffee, looking for a FIDS, which is not to be seen anywhere, and then not knowing how far the boarding gate is. So all this can change just by having some layers of software behind an app and integrating the entire data distribution system in an airport, which is already happening, except that it is not being shared for the benefit of the passenger. But that also will happen soon, in my view. And I'm just giving you one example. There are many such examples which can change your customer experience. I hope that is useful to have in your mind. By the way, how many, I don't know, have experienced the robos in Bangalore?
Not yet, but I would love to go there now.
Yeah, you should go and interact with one. It's quite interesting, the information it gives you, including the way to the taxi stand, how long it takes for you to go out. You should just ask these questions. The only problem is that everybody's in a hurry to leave the airport, right? Yeah. Nobody has the time to sit and have a conversation, even if it's a robo.
That is
so
true.
It's a fad the first time, but afterwards it is never useful. So anyway, so that's the future of technology in a sense.
Thank you. Just to add, as a passenger, I don't also look at the screen because sometimes it's hard to locate where is my flight. So you just get lost in it.
Which actually, buttresses my point, right? You've got something for the sake of having it, but of no utility. Instead, you would rather be having that pop out of your phone because you know it's useful information till you board the flight.
Correct. I agree. So thank you, Dr. Vasudevan. On this note, such an insightful and engaging session, and a privilege to hear you. And our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end, and I've taken home several nuggets from this session. And thank you also to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the end and for always sharing excellent questions.
Thank you so much, everyone. And once again, thanks to you, Blue Circle and Srishti, for inviting me to share my thoughts on this very passionate topic of mine. I'm happy we could do it finally. I know that we had to defer this a few times, and thanks to all the members who were able to find time to sit through the whole presentation and also ask me questions. Much appreciated, and look forward to staying connected.
Looking
All
forward.
of
Thank
you
you.
can please have a great weekend and look forward to catching up soon. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.